Hello everyone, and welcome to our first Apex Workshop webinar. This is the beginning of a series of Apex workshops that will be every other week until we get all the way through doing Apex triggers and Apex classes and the unit tests for them. My name is Luke Kashanik. I am the New York City Developer User Group leader, and I am accompanied by 4 colleagues from the Salesforce community: Bonnie Henners, Ohad, Idan, Thomas Taylor, and Bill Martinez, all very active Salesforce community members who have volunteered to help with our Apex workshops by answering your chat questions as we go through and flagging questions that we want to get out in front of everybody. So if you do have questions throughout the meeting, go ahead and drop those into the chat and we will get those answered for you as promptly as we can. Or for the great questions, we'll save them for the end so we can really dig in and make sure we get a solid answer on those. Today's webinar is going to focus on the Salesforce Developer Console. The Developer Console is provided by Salesforce and is one of many IDEs available for developing in Salesforce, and is by far the easiest one to get up and running, which is why we will be using this Developer Console throughout the Apex webinar series. And in this particular webinar tonight, we want to get everybody familiar with its functions, so that as we start to practice our Apex coding, you'll know where to look for different features in the Developer Console, such as checking the logs, or running unit tests, or running queries against your database. You will not need to have a Developer Edition org ready for this particular session, but in future sessions we will use a Developer Edition org so that you can practice coding Apex, and also so that you have a history of the worksheets that we'll be working on and can refer to those in the future as you start to build out your own Apex triggers and classes. These webinars are aimed specifically at those admins out there who want to extend their Salesforce skills into development. It does not require that you have any prior experience with development, although it is beneficial if you do have development experience, and certainly good to know the Salesforce Admin interface. That means knowing how to get around the various objects in Salesforce, how to create workflows, how to create custom objects and fields, how to run reports, because a lot of what we're doing in Apex is really just a programmatic version of those features that we have in the declarative interface. And wherever there are similarities, I'll be trying to point those out so that you can know that concepts you've already mastered in the declarative interface can work just as well in Apex. And all you really have to be learning is just where to find information about using Apex to create something similar to a workflow. And then just be familiar with the documentation, the Developer Console, and some of the other tools and utilities out there that really help you to get started with writing Apex triggers and Apex classes. And throughout the course, we'll really be focusing on some very basic programming concepts as they apply to Apex. This is meant to complement a lot of the resources that Salesforce and others provide for us, such as Trailhead, the help and training videos in every Salesforce org, any hands-on sessions you've attended, or any trainings you've attended with Salesforce. This focuses on some of the concepts that are not necessarily included in those resources, such as how you debug, or just concepts like data types, collections, for loops, and other basic programming necessities that are key to all development, whether you're doing it in Apex or in other languages. So with that introduction about where we'll be going, tonight we'll jump into taking a look at the developer console. Right now you should be seeing a look at my Salesforce Developer Edition org, and I'm on the Force.com homepage. And we're quickly going to jump over and open the developer console here. If you've never opened it, all you need to do is go to your name drop-down, and from that, select Developer Console, and up pops the Developer Console. Now, I've already got the class open here. I'm going to center things so it's a little more legible here and give a little more real estate. So this is the developer console. I'm guessing that a lot of you have opened this up and probably used a few of the features, and a few of you have used a lot of the features. There are many features buried within the developer console, and in my experience, Salesforce's documentation on those features is a little on the light side. So tonight we'll be trying to look at some of those, particularly the ones that you use a lot, or the ones that maybe you haven't used yet but are particularly useful. So we'll start with a quick tour of the developer console here, and then we'll progress on to some of its specific functions and features. So across the top we have a pretty standard list of drop-down menus for different functions. Here in the center, we have our main workspace. Right now, we are looking at a unit test class called Test Account Trigger, and some Apex code there. And then below, in the lower third, we have a panel of other tabs that are additional utilities that are used at different times and for different purposes. If you need to get a little more space, you can always click this drop down, and it will remove the panel of utilities at the bottom. And of course you can expand that right back up or size it to whatever size is useful for you. There are also some other features that appear and disappear depending on what you're looking at. Right now we're looking at a unit test class, so we get something like a run test button. If you're looking at a Visualforce page, you'll have a button that would pop open the Visualforce page in your browser. So keep your eyes on some of the different functions, and you'll notice that they change to really make it suitable to whatever it is you happen to be working on. So let's jump right into some of the common features found here in the file dropdown. So one of the first obvious things, this is an editor, and so you might want to be creating classes, triggers, or Visualforce pages, so you have those options from the new menu. Or you might be working on existing code, in which case you use the open window. I'm going to go ahead and click on that open window, and we'll be able to see. Right now it's defaulted to pages. Usually it defaults to classes, so I'm going to click on that. We can see that in this org, there's just one class, this Test Account Trigger, which we already had open. And if I click on triggers, we can also see that there's just one trigger here. Now, a nice functionality of this particular panel is that when you click on something that is related to other objects, it will give you those related links. And that way you can also open the additional classes or pages or components that are related to what you're working on. And a good tip if you think you're going to be opening multiple files is to use this pin in the upper right corner. That way this stays open as you pop open other files here. So I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate that by opening this account object. You can see that opened in the background without closing the open window. This way, if there were some other objects or some other classes that I wanted to open, I'd be able to get all those opened without going back to the menu and going back to this screen multiple times. One thing that you're also likely to encounter when using this in your own orgs is that if you've installed packages from AppExchange, you'll also see all of the classes, triggers, pages, components, everything, static resources that come along with those packages. and some of them can be pretty numerous. So this Hide Managed Packages checkbox here is very useful for eliminating all that noise and just focusing on your own custom Apex. And if you've got a lot of it, you can also use the filter here. And as soon as you start typing, it will automatically filter out whatever doesn't match or leave what does. So with that said, we'll just take a look at one of the other features here that I find particularly useful, and that is this objects type here. And when you click on this, it's going to give you, if I clear the filter, a list of all of the objects in your Salesforce org. So this is a nice, quick, and easy way to take a look at all of the fields that exist on any of your objects. So I'll go ahead and pop open the case object here. And since this is pinned, it stayed open. I'm going to go ahead and close that. And now I can see I've got a nice list here of all of the various fields as well as their type. I can even choose to add some other columns. Oh, not on this one. I thought this had the variation for other columns, hopefully in an upcoming release. But let me go ahead and close these. And we'll take a look at what we see here in the classes and triggers. So looking here now at the account trigger that we have open, you can see your Apex code, and we have line numbers. And then Salesforce parses the code that you have so that you get some of these features that can collapse different sections. That way, if you're really just focusing on one section, you don't have to have the entire file displayed. You can just collapse down to those that you really want to be looking at. So as we are working in these classes and triggers, Salesforce is continually compiling whatever you're working on. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's being saved. But it just means that you're getting real-time responses to whatever it is that you are working on. And this can be very useful. In fact, it's one of my favorite features about the developer console. This way, as you're typing, and you are getting information that tells you whether you made a mistake. So if I were to take out, say, a semicolon here, which is about one of the most common things to forget as you're developing, in a few seconds, I should get a report. There it is. There's a problem. And so you'll see this Problems tab. Unfortunately, this is a tab that everyone is going to get pretty familiar with as you're working on Apex. And when you click on that, it's going to give you a clue as to where the problem exists. Now, this one, this particular problem, might not be so obvious, and as we get further into our coding lessons, we'll start to take a look at how you can decipher these error messages that the developer console provides. But in this case, we know exactly where it was. It was right there where I took away a semicolon. And in another few seconds, that should recompile and clear up. But then if I really do want to commit this to Salesforce, I do need to choose the save or use Command S on OS X or on Windows using Control Save. And you can see that prior to saving a file, you get a small asterisk so that you know that it exists in an unsaved state. So even though this file is in my Salesforce org, any changes that I have made and not saved have not yet been committed to the server. And if I were to try and close this file, I'm going to get prompted to ask if I would like to close without saving. I'm going to say no and go ahead and save this file. And this usually only takes a few seconds. There it goes. So now I know that that is securely saved to my Salesforce org. And should I close Developer Console, that it will be ready and waiting for me the next time I'm ready to work on this file. All right, let's jump into some of these other tabs down here. We just took a look at the Problems tab. Oh, and just one note here. I made reference to compiling a file here. And Bonnie prompted me to say, hey, what does that mean? Compiling is when the server software evaluates the code that you have written, make sure that everything is formatted correctly, that all the dependencies are accurate, and that if you've entered a variable name, that you've defined what type of data that variable is. It is the way that the server makes sure that your code is something that can actually be run and will not immediately error out. Now, it's not to say that you can't.
Look, if I may interrupt.
Oh yes.
This is hard. Another way to think of compiling. This is really what it does in the background. Compiling is essentially when you take the code that you wrote, which is in human readable form, and translate it into the machine language, which is what is needed to be saved in order to run the code. In order for the computer to run the code, it has to be translated into a computer language. When it does this translation, this is also the opportunity for the computer to make sure that it understands and that everything that you wrote makes sense. And this is why if you made a mistake, a typo, syntax, mentioned a variable that you did not declare, or any of these other many mistakes that us developers can make, this is the time that the computer will find it out because it cannot translate it correctly into its own language. And it uses this opportunity to also give us a feedback and say, hey, there is something here that I did not expect, or something here that I don't understand. And many times it can tell us why it thinks that it's wrong. And sometimes it's a little easier to understand, and sometimes a little more difficult to understand. But that's just my 2 cents.
And usually, if it's a little more difficult to understand, help is only a Google query away, so you can always copy the error message and Google that, and you'll probably find plenty of other people out there who've had the same error, and hopefully a few people who've given them the answer to how to solve it. Certainly, any development involves a lot of Googling and reverse engineering what others have written. So never fear that there's someone out there who can help you solve those issues. Okay, so getting back to our utilities down here, I'll give us a little more screen real estate here. So I pointed out the problems, and this one, the Problems tab will primarily be used when you're working the editor on triggers or on classes or visual course pages. Another very useful tab here that's not related directly to writing Apex or triggers, but is one that is useful just any time that you need to get some information, is the query editor. This is a nice quick way to not only query your data, but it also allows you to make changes to your data. So for example, if I want to see how many leads are in this particular org, I can do select count from lead, and if I click execute, I'm going to get a pop-up window here that says 22. That means there are 22 leads in this org. If I want to get more information, I can put in fields, and when I execute that, it's going to return the data. Conveniently, in Developer Edition orgs, Salesforce provides us with some test data so that we can get busy right away with working on automation or whatever it is we're working on. And this also gives me an opportunity, since we have some data here, to demonstrate that you can also use this interface for editing. So if I wanted to go in and change the last name on this first record here, I can just double click on the last name, and type in what I think it should be, and when I click Save Rows, that's going to be updated. And while I have that highlighted, I can also use this Open Detail page, and it takes me right to that record in the interface. And I can even see here that the chatter feed is reporting that I changed the last name from Boxer to Booker. So let me get back to my developer console here as we continue our tour. And it also gives this opportunity to create new records, as well as going right to the edit page. So this can be a particularly fast and efficient way to pull up records in your Salesforce org, to edit them, and to really get around some of the constraints that you might encounter in the list views or reports when you just really need to get at data quickly. It does require that you have some familiarity with writing TOEFL, and we will be looking at that in a future session. And it is worth noting that there are a lot of other Salesforce utilities out there that can also function well as a query tool. The venerable Eclipse IDE has a particularly nice query editor that lets you click on the objects and fields and build queries. And the Workbench web application also has a nice query editor. So if you're not quite familiar enough with TOEFL yet to remember all of the various formatting necessary, those are some good options for getting familiar with that, as it'll help you build your queries. Another nice feature here of the query editor is that it also happens to save previous queries. So I can see in the history panel here that I've executed a few queries in the past. And if I click on those, it'll pop open that particular query. I can go ahead and execute this one, which is on account. And there I get a different panel showing the results from that account query. Now there's just a couple caveats about using the query editor here. While it is fairly full function, there are some of the less commonly used features in Salesforce's TOEFL language that it doesn't support. For example, if you need to not only include the active records, but if you want to see records that are deleted but still in your recycle bin, the query editor is not going to allow you to do that. Normally, we would do that by including the all rows flag. And if I try and execute it with that, I get this unknown error parsing query. And that's where some of the other tools that exist out there, such as Workbench, can be useful at times when you need to get that extra information. But certainly this is one of the quickest to get into and start using, and also has that nice editing function. Okay, let's look at some other tabs we've got here. So I already mentioned the Problems tab, which is useful for helping you know when you have a problem. But sometimes the problem isn't necessarily one of formatting your Apex, something that the compiler will recognize and tell you is a problem. Often we just make some mistakes in our code ourselves and we don't know they're there. And that's where the Logs tab comes in very handy. This Logs tab is very responsive. Not only is it going to record whatever I'm doing here in the developer console, but it will also show the results of any actions that I take in the interface. So if we note here, there's just one log here in the Logs panel now. But if I go over to my user interface, and I make an edit to a record, let's change this name back. Seems like maybe we need to correct that back to Boxer. When I save that, that's going to get logged, and right there I can see there's a new log from that change, and I get a little bit of information just here in this line that tells me about where I might have done it. It tells me that I was the user who initiated this change, that it was done in the browser. It gives me a little information about the operation. This is telling me it was an inline edit since I just double-clicked on the field to change it. Of course, a timestamp, and since this succeeded, it gives me a status of success. And conveniently, it also tells me whether I've already looked at this one or not. So if I were to double-click on this log record, that flag changes from unread to just being a blank so that I know it's one that I have looked at. Now this is an uncommonly short log record here. I'm not sure I've ever seen one quite this short, and so we'll be taking a look shortly at some ways to actually work through much more elaborate log files. Let me clean up my window here a bit by closing some of these previous windows. And as I just said, that was a really nice short log. Let's take a look at one that is a little richer. So I've got this nice unit test here prepared, and I'm going to go ahead and run this test. So not only will the logs count for any actions I take in the UI, but also when I run a test, it's going to create a log. And we can see that that just popped up down here. And now if I pop this open, we're going to get one that's a little bit longer. And this is covering all of the actions that occurred when I ran that unit test. Let me slide this over a little bit. I can barely see the slider on there, but as you can see, there is a whole lot of information here. And that gets a little tiresome to work through. And so Salesforce conveniently provides a couple of options for drilling down into this a bit. So one of the very useful ones is the filter. So on this one, I can choose filter. And as soon as I start typing something in here, it's going to start limiting what is shown to me. So if I'm curious about whether I have some workflow that operated here, I can start typing in workflow, and it starts to limit the number of logs that I see to just those that reference workflow. One warning about using this filter is that it is case sensitive. So if I were to change that capital W to a lowercase w, all of a sudden I get nothing. So you do have to be conscious of the capitalization of whatever you're searching for. I'll go ahead and take that away, and we'll get everything back here. And the other particularly useful element down here is the debug only. So if you've added system debugs to whatever code you're writing to help you to analyze it, you can check that, and you're just going to get those listed. So debugs are something that the developer specifically adds into their code to help them identify what's going on at certain points in the execution of the code. This way you have a lot of very specific control over those outputs into your logs, and can really use them to drill down to what's happening and probably what's not happening that you want to happen. I'll go ahead and check this one off. Another very useful recent addition to the developer console logs is the ability to add other columns. And by default, we get the timestamp, the event, and the details. Probably the most useful one that is not set by default is this method checkbox. When I check that, I get this new column. And this column, as I scroll through it, shows me exactly what is functioning on the records at any given moment. So So I can see here that it started, when I started running this test, it was going through that unit test class. And then pretty quickly, it starts to go into the action of inserting an account. It goes into my workflow. And here, it even names the exact workflow that was activated by my unit test. If I were to go over into my user interface, I can pull up that exact workflow rule. In this way, it's pretty easy for me to tell the order in which things are happening as the code and the workflow and validation rules and assignment rules, all of those powerful automation features in Salesforce start to do their work. And just like being able to filter on the other columns, you can also filter on this method column. So if I just want to see that workflow, I can start typing that, and it immediately just returns any log lines that refer to that workflow. And while we're talking about workflow, this is also a good chance to point out that as you're looking at workflow, you can start to pick up some clues. Like I can see here that it's saying that after it did the criteria evaluation of this workflow, it returned false. So that's my way of knowing this workflow was not one that was triggered by this record. And this can be useful even if you're not working on Apex and just have workflow that you think should be firing. This is a great way to uncover exactly what's happening behind the scenes as you are making changes to your records in Salesforce and whether the workflow or validation rules were actually applied. This is particularly useful when you have workflow that might get triggered more than once in a particular transaction. You can see if it fired both times or one time. In the case where you have, let's say, a workflow email, this could uncover if that perhaps got fired twice and sent out 2 emails when you only wanted one to go out. So in this way, something like the logs are useful to admins who are not necessarily doing development, but really need to understand what's going on in their org. And the Developer Console really delivers that very useful functionality. Now, sometimes we just get way too many logs going. Once you've written a lot of triggers or added in a lot of App Exchange apps, you can get to a point where your log files are so big that Salesforce will not display all of the information. We can see that this particular file we're looking at is a mere 32K of data. And there are ones that easily go over 2 megabytes. So if you can imagine a log that is 100 times longer than this, you can imagine it gets pretty difficult to find what you're working on. And it's because Salesforce is returning so much information about many different functions that are going on. And you don't have to see all of those. You can actually pick and choose which ones get reported in your logs. And this was one of the functions that took me a little while to really start to understand. But once I did, I started making changes to my own workspace. And I'll show you how you can do that. So here in the Debug dropdown, we have this nice Change Log Levels feature. And when you first open it, you get a somewhat unhelpful interface. You can see some information here, but right here, this Add Change is what you are aiming for. And when you click on this, you then get a new window which describes the 8 different categories that Salesforce is returning in your logs. Now, understanding what each of these takes a little while, and in the follow-up from the meeting, I'll be sending out a link to a very useful page in the Salesforce documentation that describes exactly what each of these is, as well as describing what the different categories of each of these will or will not return. So in our case, let's say we're really only interested in workflow. So I'm going to go ahead and turn all of these other ones to none. I'm not going to see my Apex code. I'm not going to see if there's any validation rules. Just going to turn workflow on, and I'm going to set it to finest. See if we can get some even further information out of there. Meanwhile, I'm going to set the rest of these to none. And now clicking done will save that. And clicking that done will also do that. So now when I run that same unit test, we get a new log file. I can immediately see that whereas before it was 32K, now it's only 6K. So it is a significantly smaller file. And when I open it, I get a much shorter log file that really helps me to focus on just those aspects of the changes that I really want to see. There are still a few things in here that might not immediately look like workflow, like I see this code unit finished. Well, that's really referring to the workflow, the workflow code. So this feature, being able to change those different log settings, really can help you to get the giant logs under control, particularly because when those really giant logs are run, Salesforce is going to truncate. They're going to cut off the end of them, so you might only see 80% of everything that happened. And often, when debugging, it's that last few lines where something went wrong and the code stopped executing that you really need to see. So being able to reduce the amount of lines in code is the most effective way to get at those. A few other things worth noting here in the logs. If you see something that you need to Google, for example, an error message, you can double-click on any of the elements here, and it's going to pop open an extra window where you actually can pretty easily cut and paste and choose the search Google for that particular information. Do note that even though it looks like you could get in here and start editing, it's not actually going to do anything if you do that. It's just sort of an artifact of how it behaves. So yeah, even though you think that might be a great way to solve or make a change, it's not actually going to change anything, which is probably for the best. All right, so we've been looking at how logs get executed here based on running a unit test. Let's take a little closer look at actually the unit test portion of the developer console. Let me go ahead and clean up some windows here. And now we'll take a look at this test class. So Salesforce knows this is a unit test class because I started it with this @isTest annotation. And that way it provides me this run test button for this particular test. But often I will have many unit tests in my Salesforce org, and I need to run more than one of them at a time. So that's where this test drop-down menu comes in handy. When I pull this down, I get a collection of different options. The one that you're most often going to want to use is the new run. And clicking that, well, if I had more than one test class in here, I would get all of those stacked up, and I could add multiple ones. But in addition to being able to run more than one test class, if my test class has several test methods within it, as this one does, I can choose to run just one of those. So I'll go ahead and do that. And when I run this one, it's only going to run this test all, that's the one that's right behind here, and not run this negative test. There, that has run, and we can see that now the size is even smaller. This ability to run just one test method in a test class that has multiple methods is really advantageous because usually when you're working on a unit test, you're really just working on one of the test methods and trying to get that one in shape so that it's testing what you want and that your asserts are passing. So this is a nice quick way to keep those logs very short. As we can see, it's half the size of the previous one. And also allows me to have a lot more test methods in any given test class so that I can have all of them together where they apply to a particular application. In the past, before we had that function, it was often more efficient to have many different test classes so that you could just focus on debugging or editing one. But now it's pretty reasonable to have many test methods all in one test class where they all belong together. And we'll be using unit tests a lot in the future Apex coding webinars. So you'll have a lot of chances to get more familiar with these and to really see how these work and how to make sure that your code is solid. Some other things that you get here on the test tab, we can see that I actually have a record of all the tests that I've run. So I've run the test 3 times tonight, and I am getting a nice green check mark here showing that my test passed. And if I were to expand this plus, I can see that this particular run at 7:30 did run both of those. And I also get some information about how long they took, as well as if there were any failures. And in just a second, we'll introduce some failures here so you can see what those look like. We can also see the most recent test I ran, where I just ran one, is showing only one test here, and that means only one test was run. All right, let's introduce some failures into here because, well, unfortunately, you're going to see a lot of those, and learning how to read those and find those here in the developer console gets important. So I'm going to make a quick edit here, something that I know will make my unit test fail. Go ahead and save that. And I'm just going to highlight this because now I can go to test, and I can just click rerun. I don't actually have to go back to that panel and select it again. This will just immediately go into that one. And if I was successful at failing, yes, I was successful at failing. Look at that, we've got a red X. So this tells me that something went wrong with this particular test. Now, I don't get a whole lot of information here. I do have to expand this out. And once I do that, I can see exactly which test failed. If I click this, it's now going to give me a lot more useful information. So I can see that there was an error here. Clicking on that will give me a little more friendly view than the column shows. And it's going to describe what exactly happened. And it's also going to tell me where that happened. So I can know this was on line 19, so that's probably where I want to go looking. And if I go back to that test class, indeed, I can see, yep, here's line 19, right where I made that change. We'll go ahead and fix that back up and save it. So now that we get back to a successful test. All right, what else have we got here in the test space? So here in the test dropdown, We do also get some other functions that are particularly useful. We get this rerun failed test. That way, if you have a test class that has a dozen different test methods and half of them are working and half of them are failing, as you go through and correct those failed ones, you can just select to rerun only the failed ones. It's going to run a little quicker. It's just going to test the ones you're concerned about. And we can see now it just ran that, and that one has been fixed up. It's worth noting that you can also execute these tests from the Salesforce user interface. And I do find the setup menus version of running unit tests to be a little more helpful because it does provide a nice quick way to select all of them, which in this case is just one. But what I particularly like about it is the view test history section here. And this gives me a really nice view that persists even after I close my developer console. So for example, if I close my developer console now, when I open that back up again, that recent history of tests is no longer there. And so if I really do need to see recent history, this particular view in the setup is very useful. And like a lot of other aspects of the Salesforce interface, you can use views to get an even more filtered view. So I'm going to go ahead and create one called failed tests. And now I'm really able to filter that down to just those ones that I am really interested in looking at. This is particularly helpful, these failed test views, when you're running all of your unit tests in an org. And of course, the ones that succeed, great. You're not concerned about those. You really just want to know which ones you really need to spend some time and some attention on. But back to our developer console here. The last feature that I'm going to point out in the developer console is the feature called Anonymous Apex. This is a very useful tool and also a somewhat dangerously powerful tool, as we'll see in a minute here, because here you can execute Apex code that is going to work directly on the live data in your Salesforce org. So whereas unit tests, when you use them, they create test data. That test data only exists during the test, and as soon as it's done, Salesforce cleans up that test data, and nothing that is your real data gets touched. But here in Anonymous Apex, that is not the case. What you say in here can absolutely affect what is in your database. And as you can see, I have something loaded up here that is probably the most dangerous thing you can do. So I am going to show you that now for a little bit of excitement. What I have here is a delete command to delete all of the tasks in my Salesforce org. Now, just to show you that there are some tasks in this org, let's pop over to our query editor, and let's see how many tasks there are. So I pulled that select count from task from my history. I'll go ahead and execute that. There's only 3 tasks in this org. Now, if your Salesforce orgs are anything like mine, the tasks table tends to be one of the most popular, and you may end up with potentially millions of tasks. So this can also be a useful way to sort of cull those if you are very cautious about it. But in this case, we're in a developer edition org, and I'm just going to throw caution to the wind, and I'm going to delete all of them. So I've got this loaded here. I'm going to go ahead and hit execute. And that happens immediately. If I take a look at the logs tab, I can see there's a brand new log that just fired. It was successful. And if we run that query again, now it still thinks that query is active. Let me close that. Now let's run that again. And now they are all gone. All right, so now we have the warning about using anonymous apex out of the way. Let's look at how it can be used creatively, not destructively. So aside from using this to modify live data, it can also be a very convenient way to just test some very simple apex. And we'll start using this almost immediately in our webinars when we start talking about data types in the next session. And rather than having to open a class or a trigger, I can actually use this to start practicing some of my apex. So I'm going to create a string here. And a string is just like a text field that you might create in the setup interface. I'm going to call this string my name. And I'm going to type my name in there. And remember to add my semicolon at the end because the compiler will call foul on me if I don't. And now I'm going to make sure that that got saved. Use a debug statement here and put in that variable name. And now, because I'm going to see this in the logs, I'm going to click that open log. That way it'll immediately open it and save me a few clicks when I execute this. So off we go, executing this. Now, because this particular line of code wasn't working with any real, working with the data in Salesforce, it was just creating text. This is really just happening on the server safely. And I can see here in my logs, hey, I got nothing. I did not get a debug statement like I expected. Why is that? Because I turned it off. Let me go back and change my log levels, and we'll try that again. So here we go, back into the change log levels, back into add change, and there it is. I had system set to none. So I had better set this to finest and set my apex code to finest. That should get me a little more useful information when I do that. Get that in there. Let's try that again here. All right, so back we are. The anonymous apex window saved my last information. So let's see if we can get a proper debug output into the log now. Hey, that looks like some more data. I'm going to click my debug only checkbox here, and there it is. So I can get that information back. And what you can also see here, even though I didn't turn everything back on, this doesn't run through all of the same transactions that, say, editing a record would. It doesn't kick off any workflow. It doesn't kick off any triggers or validation rules. It's really just a window where I can execute a little harmless apex in this case. It's only when I start actually trying to pull in real records and throwing around IDs that anonymous apex gets dangerous. And one other note about it, if you're using this a lot, you probably want the window to stay open so you don't have to keep going back to that drop down. So this little up arrow here is going to pop that out, and now you have that as an independent window that will stay open as you go back and forth between, say, the logs or perhaps your apex code window. All right, so that brings me to the end here of my my introduction to Developer Console. because these are going to be the features that we'll be using most in the upcoming Apex webinars. There certainly are a lot of other powerful features here in the developer console. When you start writing Visual Force and having really large sets of data, you're able to track how quickly that is being rendered in your browser, or how slow your queries are processing, and that can help you figure out ways to make them more efficient. There's much deeper levels of debugging that are available. But really for the Apex Workshop series that we're working on, these features that I covered tonight are the ones that we will be focusing on most. And just because I mentioned a few other useful elements out there, or useful utilities out there, I wanted to point out the other one that I think is most frequently and easily used alongside with development, and that is Workbench. So Workbench is a different web app. We'll go ahead and close Developer Console here. And I've got this bookmarked here, but we'll send out the link to that. And as you can see, when I go to this website, it is a Salesforce product. So you can use this confidently that your data is not leaving the Salesforce platform. And it gives you the option to work with either your production orgs or sandboxes. And it's pretty smart. If you're already logged into your Salesforce org, when you click Login with Salesforce, it is, oh, I misspoke there. Let me see. I thought that was going to take me right in. I think this is actually Workshop 3. So same login, but it's using a system called OAuth to authenticate me. So it's going to pop this screen up, and I have to give it permission to access this particular Salesforce org. And what I particularly wanted to show here is something that I mentioned when we were looking at the queries, the query editor in the developer console. In the developer console, you kind of needed to know the SOQL query language. But here in Workbench, it gives you a nice visual interface that allows you to just click to build up a SOQL query. So we can see that just by clicking those, it gave me a way to get a count of the number of accounts in my record, or I can choose to return different fields. I can use sorting on this. I can add filters to it. So I'll make active equal true. And up here, this is a feature that I mentioned the developer console doesn't do. It will not include, developer console will not include records in your recycle bin. So here I can make that choice to include those archived records. Additionally, I can also get it to give me a CSV so that I can then perhaps make some edits and upload the data back into Salesforce. So this is an alternative to the data loader or some of the other means for working on your data. And it does, in addition to being able to pull data out, it does also give you a way to insert new records from CSVs. I'm not going to go in depth on the data loader because that's something that probably a lot of admins are familiar with, and I'm sure that with a little experimentation you figure out how similar this is to other ones. But there is some other useful utilities in here. Unlike the developer console, if you really need to take a look at your Salesforce objects, yes, you could open them in the developer console, but here you actually get a much more informative view about any of your objects. So this one, I chose standard and custom objects, and this started with accounts. So I'll go ahead and expand all. And not only do I get the object and field name, but I also start to get a lot of details about each of those. Now, a lot of these are not something that you're going to use every day, but it is a nice quick way to really dig into the custom and standard objects in your org. And the last feature that I will point out here in the Workbench, because this is kind of like Anonymous Apex, it's powerful and dangerous. There's a password management function in here. So if you ever need to force a new password onto a user record, this is one of the quickest and easiest ways to do that. So unlike the other functions we have in the user interface that only give us the chance to reset it, here we can actually set a new password on a user. Now, this being my developer edition, I've pretty much only got my user, and I don't think it will let me force change my password through this, but just to sort of step up to the brink, I could go ahead and enter the user ID and put in a popular password like password123. Don't use that. And set that as a new password. Oh, I didn't quite get it right. And it even, I guess, is telling me I didn't type that right. There we go. So this is a very powerful function that the Workbench offers you. Besides Developer Console and Workbench, there are a lot of other utilities out there. Certainly the Eclipse IDE is one of the oldest and still very popular interfaces. The Maven's Mate is a plugin that can be used in the Sublime text editor or also the Atom text editor. Cloud9 recently released one that is a very nice user interface in your web browser. And I'll be sending around a link following this session that will let you take a look at some of the other ones that are out there. And a lot of developers like different ones for different reasons. And you'll be able to explore those and see if there's one that really suits your own needs. But as I said at the outset, we're really going to use the Developer Console throughout this webinar series because it's just so easy to use and is always there for us. And so with that, I'm going to conclude tonight's webinar. And I'll be sending out, in addition to some of the resources that I mentioned, I'll be sending out information about upcoming sessions and giving you a little information about what you'll need to do to prepare for those. And now I'm going to check in with the moderators and see if there were any particularly good questions that came up throughout the course of our session tonight that I want to get out in front of everyone. First I want to give a thanks to all of our moderators, Bonnie Henners, Ohadi Don, Thomas Taylor, and Bill Martinez for joining me here tonight. I see they've been visually answering your questions, and I'm grateful to them for being there to keep those underway. Moderators, were there any questions that you think we should get out in front of everyone?
Look, this is Ohad. I think that you've done a great job of going through everything, and even some of the questions that I was planning on bringing to everybody's attention in the end of the session, you ended up going back and answering. So I don't see, unless any of the other moderators has any other questions that they want to bring up to the group, I don't see any question that has not been answered generally. That anybody asked.
I see one just came in from Ahmad, and he asks if in the future they will all be 1 hour long. And the answer is I expect the coding ones to take a little bit longer because we devote some time for you to work through the practice worksheets. And while you're doing that, we moderators will be available to help you debug your code and make sure that everyone is really grasping the Apex concepts that we're introducing. So I would say you can definitely count on these being longer in the future. But since this one was really just an introduction to Developer Console, we were able to get it all into an hour.
Luke, do you know if we will be able to make recording of these sessions available to users to view after the session?
Yes, we will. All of these webinars will be recorded and they will be hosted on ReadyTalk. And the link to those will be included with the other links to documentation that was referenced in each session.
Great.
All right, well, I will then close this up with a recommendation that everyone start their own developer edition org at developer.salesforce.com and certainly get into Trailhead and you can start tackling the various modules there. Because if you start working on some of the Apex ones there, it's probably going to help you ask better questions during the upcoming webinars to really see how the topics we're covering here apply to the Apex modules there. And certainly, again, another thanks to the volunteers from the community here. And just as we all have benefited so much from the community in our own Salesforce careers, we're here to give back to those of you here in attendance, and we encourage all of you to do the same as your skills advance in Salesforce. Get out there and go to the success community and to answers and see if you can answer a few questions for others. Let's keep building this community up and helping more people discover just what a great, powerful tool Salesforce is. So thank you very much, everyone. That concludes tonight's session, and I will look forward to seeing you at the next session, which will cover Apex data types, all of the underlying fields and all of the data types underlying those fields we use every day in our user interface. So thanks, everyone, and I will talk to you again soon.
Good night.
Good night, all.